A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
We often talk about the tyranny of distance as an insurmountable weight that drags down remote economies, but today's prompt from Daniel has me looking at it through a different perspective. He wants us to dig into Mauritius, specifically as a case study, in how a tiny island nation manages to stay fully sovereign and economically modern, while sitting thousands of kilometers away from any major landmass. It is a question of the sovereignty of choice versus the gravity of geography.
It is a notable outlier, corn. When most people think of remote islands in the Indian Ocean, they think of holiday destinations or military outposts like Diego Garcia, which we talked about in episode 1413. But Mauritius is a different entity entirely. It is a high-functioning democracy with a diversified economy that has defied every geographic disadvantage. I have been looking into what economists call the Mauritian Miracle, and the data behind it is significant when you consider where they started at independence in 1968. As of March 21, 2026, they remain one of the few high-income economies in Africa, and their trajectory offers a blueprint for how to survive as a remote hub in a world where global supply chains are increasingly fractured.
Back then, people were predicting the island would collapse. James Mead, the Nobel Prize-winning economist, famously said Mauritius was a case study in failure before it even got off the ground. He saw a monocrop economy built entirely on sugar, a rapidly growing population, and zero natural resources. He thought they were destined to be a permanent dependency. And yet, it is consistently one of the most stable and prosperous nations in the region. How did they change that trajectory so effectively?
It comes down to a very deliberate rejection of the dependency model. Unlike places like Reunion, which functions as an overseas department of France and relies on massive subsidies from Paris, Mauritius chose the path of total autonomy. They realized early on that if you are small and remote, your only real product is your institutional stability. They adopted the Westminster system and maintained it. They have had peaceful transfers of power for decades, which created an environment where foreign capital felt safe. The real mechanical shift was moving from sugar into manufacturing, then tourism, and now into sophisticated financial services and technology. They did not just wait for help, they built a niche.
The transition to a service-based economy interests me because that is where the geography gets difficult. If you're a manufacturing hub, you need ports and ships. If you're a financial and tech hub, you need data and talent. And keeping talent on an island that is 2,000 kilometers off the coast of Africa is a major challenge. How do they handle the brain drain that usually affects these remote island states?
That is one of their biggest hurdles, but they have played a very clever hand. Instead of just trying to stop people from leaving, they have positioned themselves as the stable environment for the entire continent of Africa. The Mauritius International Financial Center now contributes over 12% of their gross domestic product. They have created a legal and regulatory framework that is so robust that if you are a global investor looking to put money into an emerging market in Africa or Asia, you do not go direct, you go through Mauritius. They have turned their sovereignty into a service. They are a jurisdictional gateway. They have over 40 double taxation avoidance agreements in place, which makes them the preferred conduit for investment into India and mainland Africa.
I see. So it is not about where they are physically, but where they are legally and digitally. I was reading about the Ebene Cyber City project. They built a high-tech city from scratch in the early 2000s to anchor their digital economy. It is a bet that they could become the primary technology hub of the Indian Ocean. But Herman, you cannot run a cyber city on a remote island without serious hardware under the ocean. How do they solve the connectivity problem when the distance is 2,000 kilometers of seawater?
You are talking about the submarine cables. This is where the logistics of isolation gets significant. Mauritius is currently connected to several major fiber optic systems, including the LION, the SAFE cable, and the more recent METISS and T3 cables. They have invested heavily in ensuring they have redundant high-speed connectivity because without it, their entire financial sector vanishes. This infrastructure is as critical to their trade as deepwater docks were to 19th century port cities. If you do not have the bandwidth, you are not on the map. What is impressive is that they have managed this infrastructure without the direct military or economic backing of a superpower patron. They pay their own way, which gives them the right to set their own rules.
That self-reliance comes at a cost. We talked in episode 474 about the requirements of autonomy. For Mauritius, that means managing an exclusive economic zone that is massive. It is something like 2.3 million square kilometers of ocean. That is a lot of water to police for a nation with a population of only 1.3 million people. How do they manage the logistics of that much space?
They have pivoted toward what they call the blue economy. They are not just looking at the land, they are looking at the seabed. They have joint management agreements with nations like the Seychelles to manage the continental shelf. The logistics are difficult. Everything from fuel to food has to be imported. They are extremely vulnerable to global commodity price shocks. When oil prices spike, the whole island feels it immediately because their entire electricity grid and transport system relies on imported energy. That is why they are pushing so hard into renewables and looking at maritime logistics. They are trying to position Port Louis as a major transshipment hub, a strategic refueling and storage point for ships moving between Asia and Africa. The idea is that if you can become a vital node in the global shipping network, the ships have to come to you anyway, which lowers your own logistics costs.
They are trying to recreate historical maritime trade patterns for the 21st century. If you are the place where everyone has to stop to refuel or swap containers, you are no longer isolated. You are a central node. It is a brilliant bit of geographic reframing. But let us talk about the internal politics. You mentioned they are a stable democracy, but is it a perfect one? Small islands often struggle with nepotism and dynastic politics because of the close-knit nature of the population.
That is the difficult side of the Mauritian model. You do see a lot of the same family names in the Prime Minister's office over the decades. The Judnoth and Ramgoolam families have dominated the political landscape since independence. There is a sense of a political elite that is very tightly knit. However, the saving grace has been that they have maintained the rule of law. Even when the politics get messy, they do it within the framework of the Constitution. They have an independent judiciary that works, and they consistently rank at the top of the Ibrahim Index of African governance. That is the factor that separates them from so many other post-colonial states. Investors do not care if the Prime Minister's son is running for office as long as the contracts are honored and the courts are fair.
It is a very pragmatic form of governance. It is not about ideological purity. It is about what keeps the lights on and the fiber optic cables humming. But they are not totally alone. They have to play a delicate geopolitical game. You have India, China, and the European Union all vying for influence in the Indian Ocean. I look at their relationship with India specifically, and it seems like more than just a standard diplomatic tie. There is a deep cultural and strategic connection there.
There is. Over 2/3 of the Mauritian population is of Indian descent, and India has treated Mauritius as its primary strategic partner in the region. India has provided development assistance, including funding for their new light rail system, the Metro Express, and the new Supreme Court building. But it is not a one-way street. India gets a reliable partner in a contested part of the world. We see this play out on Agalega, a pair of outer islands belonging to Mauritius, where India has helped build a major 3,000-meter airstrip and a large jetty. There is a lot of debate about whether this is effectively an Indian military base, but the Mauritian government frames it as a sovereign facility that they manage. They want the infrastructure and the security, but they will not sign away the title deed.
That is a sharp contrast to the Chagos Archipelago situation. Daniel mentioned the surrounding atolls, and you cannot talk about Mauritius without talking about the Chagos Islands and Diego Garcia. That is the biggest friction point in their entire foreign policy. It is the ultimate test of their sovereignty.
It is the defining struggle for their national identity. For listeners who might have missed episode 1413, the United Kingdom detached the Chagos Islands from Mauritius right before independence in the mid-60s to lease Diego Garcia to the United States for a military base. For decades, Mauritius has been fighting in every international forum to get it back. And they have been winning. The International Court of Justice and the United Nations General Assembly have both backed the Mauritian claim, calling the British occupation illegal. In late 2024 and throughout 2025, we saw intense negotiations between the United Kingdom and Mauritius. The British have finally acknowledged the need to resolve this, but the sticking point remains the long-term status of the base on Diego Garcia. Mauritius has offered the United States a 99-year lease to keep the base. They are saying, "We do not want to kick the Americans out, we just want you to pay the rent to the rightful owner."
It creates a unique tension. On one hand, Mauritius is a pro-Western, business-friendly democracy. On the other hand, they are calling out the United Kingdom and the United States on the world stage for what they describe as a colonial crime. How do they balance that without getting frozen out of the global financial system?
Because they have made themselves too useful to be ignored. This goes back to the idea of institutional stability as a product. The West needs a stable, democratic partner in the Indian Ocean. If you alienate Mauritius, you lose your best gateway into African markets and your most reliable democratic ally in the region. Mauritius knows this, so they use boutique diplomacy. They are small enough to be non-threatening but sophisticated enough to be indispensable. They are saying, "We will be your financial hub and your strategic partner, but you have to respect our borders." It is a masterclass in leveraging soft power to offset a lack of hard military power. They even signed a free trade agreement with China, the first of its kind for an African nation, while maintaining their deep ties with India and the West. They are the ultimate middleman.
I wonder if that model is replicable, or if Mauritius is a unique outlier. We did that episode on the requirements of autonomy, and it felt like the conclusion was that most small states eventually have to pick a side. Mauritius suggests you can stay in the middle, but only if you have a very specific set of circumstances. You need that initial democratic buy-in, you need a high level of education, and you need to be willing to pivot your entire economy every 20 years.
The education piece is an underrated part of the story. They have had free universal education for a long time, and they have heavily subsidized tertiary education. When you are a remote island, your only real resource is the knowledge of your citizens. If you do not invest in that, you are stuck in the dependency trap. You see this in other remote islands where the economy is just tourism and fishing. The talented kids leave and never come back. Mauritius has tried to create a reason for them to stay by building a complex economy that needs high-level skills. They are not just exporting people, they are importing problems to solve for the rest of the world.
Even with all that, the physical reality of being that remote takes a toll. We are talking about a nation that is a collection of islands in a warming ocean. Does all this economic autonomy matter if the sea level rise starts claiming your outer atolls or your coastal infrastructure? As of 2026, climate change is not a future threat for them. It is a current budgetary line item.
That is the existential threat that concerns Mauritian planners. They are very active in the small island developing states bloc at the United Nations because they know they are on the front lines. But even here, they are taking an autonomous approach. They are investing in coral reef restoration and coastal protection using their own technical expertise. They are not just asking for aid, they are trying to lead the research on how to build resilient island infrastructure. They realize that if they do not solve it, no one else is going to do it for them. They are also part of the Indian Ocean Commission, which is headquartered in Mauritius. They use that regional platform to coordinate on maritime security and environmental protection. They know that in a remote region, your neighbors are your immediate support, even if those neighbors are hundreds of miles away.
It is that self-reliance that stands out. Whether it is building a cyber city or fighting a legal battle for the Chagos Islands, there is a persistent refusal to be a victim of their geography. Daniel's prompt highlights the difference between being a place on a map and being a player in the world. Mauritius has managed to be both. They have taken the tyranny of distance and turned it into a protective barrier that preserves their unique institutional culture.
It is a complex balancing act. You are constantly balancing the interests of India, China, and the West while trying to keep your own population from moving to London or Paris. But so far, the Mauritian model has proven that distance is not destiny. If you have strong institutions and a clear-eyed view of your own niche in the global market, you can be a tiny speck in the ocean and still be a sovereign powerhouse. They are currently ranked in the top 20 of the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business Index, which is a rarity for any nation, let alone one this remote. It is not an accident. It is the result of 50 years of deliberate policy choices to prioritize autonomy over the path of dependency.
Sovereignty requires active maintenance. You have to exercise it by making difficult, independent choices, or it atrophies into dependency. Mauritius has been doing that work for over half a century. They have shown that you do not need a massive army or vast natural resources to be a significant player. You just need to be the most stable and reliable person in the room.
That is a vital point. And that brings us back to the Chagos dispute. The reason Mauritius can stand up to the United Kingdom is that they are not waiting for a check from London every month to pay their civil servants. When you are financially independent, your sovereignty has real power. If Reunion wanted to claim independence tomorrow, they would have to figure out how to replace billions of euros in French subsidies overnight. Mauritius already did that work 50 years ago. They are the proof that the price of autonomy is high, but the cost of dependency is higher in the long run.
It is a compelling story, and I am glad Daniel pushed us to look into it. There is something deeply impressive about a nation that refuses to let the vastness of the Indian Ocean define its limits. It is a reminder that, in the modern world, connectivity is more about your legal and digital architecture.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, my